Director of Operations and Membership for TexProtects. I'd like to welcome you to the second presentation in our webinar hosted by the Texas Council of Child Welfare Boards and TexProtects. Just letting you know that we are recording this presentation and it will be available on both organizations' websites as soon as we're done here. If you're having trouble hearing us in any way through your computer speakers, please click the audio menu on the left side of your screen right here and select Use Telephone. And from there, a pop-up window will appear and with a call-in number and participant code. So during the presentation, if you have any questions at all, feel free to type your question in the chat box right here, and we'll either answer it, we'll hopefully answer it by the end of the presentation then. So now I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Public Policy and Education, Diana Martinez.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. We are going to do a little bit on the budget. And the budget process can be extremely complicated. This webinar today is designed to give you a general overview of the process and understand some of the parts, where some of the numbers come from. And then we're going to go into the agenda that the Child Protection Roundtable has adopted, with the Texas Council of Child Welfare Boards has endorsed. And so we hope that you'll become a little bit familiar with that. And when we have Child Protection Day, you will come help advocate up at the Capitol. So let's go ahead and begin. First off, you really need to know the budget process takes a long time, and there are some very key folks in there. And the first of those is the Office of the Governor. It's very involved in the budget process, the whole thing. And it includes his office, and he has an office called the Office of Budget Planning and Policy. And they kind of run the show in essence. The other major player in the budget is the Legislative Budget Board. And most of you, if you've been at the Capitol at all, I've heard reports, you've heard this called the LBB. And so their main purpose as an agency is to develop the legislative appropriation request for all the agencies. And so they really concentrate on fiscal policy in our state. They also do reports during the interim on different aspects of the state government. Our next big player in the budget is the Comptroller of Public Accounts, and that is currently Susan Combs. That is a statewide elected position, and it is a 4-year term. And so her main job is to really tell the legislature how much money they have to spend. Her office concentrates a lot on financial forecasting. Another big player is the state auditor's office, and that's led by John Keel. And he goes and audits different state agencies and has reports from everything to turnover to how counts are handled. You may have seen a lot of interesting articles in the news about the cancer agency, and they did a very scathing audit on that agency on how it was being run. And so he's a very key player in agencies and how they're run and how they're funded. And then, of course, all the state agencies. The one that we're most familiar with is the Department of Family and Protective Services, but there is a huge plethora of state agencies out there that go through this process every 2 years. So it really takes 4 years to prepare, produce, and then administer the budget. So in the first year, agencies start developing their appropriations requests. Then in that second year, which is the year that we are now in for the next process, that's during the legislative session, and that's when the budget process goes through the legislatures, where the House and the Senate, and then the governor gets to look at it. So we're in the second year. And in the third and fourth year, that's when the budget is administered. So right now, we are working on the budget for 2014 and 2015. Let's talk about steps in just very simple terms. So what happens is the governor, along with LBB, really kind of decide, and they do a lot of strategic planning on it. How do we want our government to grow? What do we want to cut back? How do we want the next funding cycle to look like? So they work on that. Each state agency develops their own strategic plan on how they want their agency to grow. And there's a lot of parts in there that are statute dictates they have to do certain things. So they develop that strategic plan, and that gets submitted for approval. Then in the spring, and it's usually in March or April, I think we always joke around, it's always around April Fool's Day. The LB sends out instructions to all the agencies on how to prepare their budgets. And a lot of that deals with what they consider part of the base budget and what they have to ask for in terms of exceptional items. And the base budget really kind of goes upon what they got appropriated last time. And then there are some other things in there, but the basic is they start from where they were at last time. And then the LBB, along with the governor's office, actually holds hearings on all the agencies during the interim. And these, frequently people don't know about these, and they're not widely attended, but there are hearings that are held during the interim leading up to the beginning of session on all agencies. And then also what you will see is many of the agencies have their own process for getting stakeholder input on their budget. DFPS has various stakeholder input meetings that they do and hearings that they do so that they can get commentary from folks that are very involved with DFPS on what they think the budget priority should be. So in the fall, prior to session, what we have is all the agencies have turned over to LBB what their LAR, their legislative appropriations request is. So the LBB has that, and so they start drafting the appropriations bill. And just because the agency turns something in, that doesn't mean that's what's going to look like with the LBB draft. So they draft two different bills. They work with the House and the Senate, and so at the beginning of every session, you have two bills that are filed. It's always SB1 and HB1. And so that's the beginning. Now, they are constricted on what they can spend based upon what they are told by the Comptroller. And the Comptroller at the beginning of session releases her revenue estimate, and that guides them in how much they can spend. So the Senate Finance Committee is the committee in the Senate that works on SB1, our bill, our funding bill, and in the House, it's the House Committee on Appropriations, and that's HB1. And so Senate Finance Committee is chaired by Senator Tommy Williams, and the House Committee on Appropriations is chaired by Representative Jim Pitts. And so what they do is they got their bills filed, and then both chambers will start hearing testimony on their bills. And they do the process a little differently, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But so you've got the two bills filed, and hearings are starting to go on both bills. But at the end of the day, only one bill will actually pass. And that bill, what they do is they change off every other session. So last session, what passed was HB1. So this session, what will pass will be SB1. And so after the bill gets out of committee, it goes before the full body for a vote, and then it gets passed out of one chamber. Now what happens at that point, so let's say in this case we have the House bill moving along, it gets passed out of the House, it gets sent over to the Senate. Now the Senate will have been hearing and working on their own versions all along of SB1. And so what they will do is they will substitute their version in, and then they'll pass that and send it back. So obviously the House would be like, wait. We had a different budget, and their bills are different. They're like $1 billion different. And so what happens is that they have to go to what's called a conference committee. And that's really where the fun begins. But the way the Senate treats their process is not quite as public as how the House treats its process, although we are hearing from Chairman Williams that is going to be very different this legislative session. In sessions past, the Senate Finance Committee as a whole would hear testimony on all the different agencies that they have purview under that are contained in SB1. And so, and for those of you that came this last week, week before last, you had to wait all day long into another day before you could testify because they noticed up all the Health and Human Service agencies at once. So it took an enormous amount of time for them to hear all testimony on all those agencies. So they take the testimony in the Senate as a Finance Committee as a whole, and then after that, what they start doing is they start breaking down into what's called work groups. And they'll have a work group, and we'll go over the different articles a little bit later, but they'll have a work group for several of the articles, or if it's a big article, for one article made up of 4 or 5 senators from the Finance Committee. And that's where they really start getting into the nuts and bolts and marking up the bill and how are they going to fund it. In the past, those work group meetings have been difficult to find out when they're going to be. And if you are able to find out when they're going to happen, they have occurred in rooms that are really small. So you would go in there and there would be the members obviously sitting around a table, but there wouldn't be any room for folks to sit. You would have to stand up along the wall. The rooms would fill up so that not everybody could fit in there. And it was really uncomfortable. And what we are hearing from Chairman Williams is that that's going to change this time, that the process is going to be more transparent. And that has been a big push that has been happening throughout the interim about that there needs to be more transparency in the budget process. So those of us that have to be out here and follow that, we're very excited about that. They're also saying that they're going to have the materials much more readily available. It used to be that you had to go to somebody's office and beg for a copy of the marked up budget. They're saying that those materials are going to be much easier to get a hold of this go around. Now, over on the House side, the Committee on Appropriations, they do things a little differently. So the Committee on Appropriations, the whole committee does take testimony on certain subjects overall. But then they start up into what they call subcommittees. Those subcommittees will take testimony on agencies. So if you wanted to testify on DFPS, the subcommittee on Article 2 would have a hearing, and more than likely that would be the only thing they would be hearing that day. So you're not there with all the other people testifying with all the other agencies. It's usually a much more pleasant wait than it is for when you have to be there for 2 days on the big, huge Senate Finance Committee. Last legislative session, the subcommittee on Article 2 was chaired by John Zerwas, and I believe that is going to be the case again. And he has the person that has really worked on our issues pertaining to DFPS that's on that subcommittee is Representative Donna Dukes. And she knows an incredible amount about DFPS. And what Zerwas does is he gives each member of his subcommittee a different part of the HHSC enterprise, the Health and Human Service Commission enterprise. He gives them each a different part to work on. So Representative Dukes would work on the Department of Family and Protective Services. Someone else would work on the Department of State Health Services, et cetera. And so once they have their recommendations, then that subcommittee goes to the committee as a whole. The whole committee still has to vote on it. Same thing with the Senate committee. That still has to go to recommendations as a whole. But that is where a lot of the work is going on, and it's in the work groups in the Senate, it's in the subcommittees in the House. That's where things are really happening. The other very key part is the conference committee. So let's say we have our Senate bill, because we're going to have the Senate bill. It's going to be the one this year. So our Senate bill gets kicked out of committee. It goes to the Senate floor. It passes, goes over to the House. The House then, what they will do is they will substitute their bill that they have worked on. So even though it's still SB1, it's now a committee substitute, and it doesn't look like it did when it came over. So now we've got this House bill, then it goes to the House floor, and it gets voted on. And there's a lot of amendments that go on. The budget bills take forever. It's just a lot of things. And so after the House votes on it, then they say, okay, we're kicking it out. We're sending it back over to the Senate. The Senate is not going to adopt the changes. Now, you can at that point say, yeah, we agree with all your changes. We're going to adopt it. That never happens. So what happens is there's a motion not to concur. They're not going to agree to all those changes, and they'll have a motion to appoint a conference committee. And then the House will do the same thing. They'll have a motion to appoint a conference committee. And then you'll also hear motions to instruct the conference committee. And so what they're doing is the body says, okay, conference committee, we're giving you an incredibly important job. And we want you to go forth and work on this conference committee to try to hash out these two versions of this bill. But these are the limitations you have. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't spend here, you have to cut here. So they can really instruct the conference committee with those motions to instruct. Now, the conference committee is small. It's an incredibly powerful group of folks that are working on the budget. And so it's made up of both the chairs, so Senator Williams and Representative Pitts will be on it. Their vice chairs will both be on it. And then there'll be a select handful of folks from both the Senate and the House on that committee. And so that conference committee starts to work on hashing out the differences. They try to come to an agreement on what the bill should look like. And so it'll change both versions. It won't be the same as what had come out on either version. It'll change. And then those conference committee reports have to be adopted. It has to be voted on by the full body. And so all this process takes an extremely a lot of work. And it's not the only thing those committees work on. Right now, they're working on very quickly on a supplemental appropriations bill because we did not fully fund the Medicaid program last legislative session, and the Medicaid program is going to run out of money. And so in order to make sure that the Medicaid program doesn't run out of money, they have to get a supplemental appropriation out in order to fund that, and we're hearing that that's probably going to be in the beginning of March. There are other bills that deal with finance and appropriations that they hear as well. So these folks are very, very busy If you're ever trying to get in to see someone who's on appropriations, on finance, it's extremely difficult to meet with them during session. They are in meetings almost every single day. A lot of the meetings start at 7:30 in the morning. They'll go in before they go to the floor. They'll come out and they'll go back in the committee after they come out of the floor. It is a huge commitment to either be on the Finance Committee or the Appropriations Committee. And so after we have that conference committee report and both chambers have approved it, and we have a bill, it's become enrolled, it's sent on to the Comptroller, she has to certify the budget, and then it's sent to the governor for signature. Now, the governor in Texas does have it, so he can veto line item. So a lot of times you'll hear Article 1, Article 2, and folks are like, what are they referring to? That's how the budget is broken down. And so what I've done for ease here is I've just put the articles that are contained in the budget and where each of the major ones that obviously that we're always have our initiatives around is the Health and Human Service Article 2. That contains the funding for DFPS, Department of Family and Protective Services. The education is the other big article, and that contains not only public education, it also contains higher education. So that's the other big article in terms of money. But those are all the other ones. And what will happen is usually a work group or a subcommittee will only have Article 2 or only have education. Some of the other ones they'll generally combine, and so someone may have 2 articles because these are a lot smaller. The amounts they're dealing with are a lot smaller, and the number of agencies that are under are a lot smaller. And so I know this slide is a little bit difficult to see. Hopefully, if you are able to print out this, you'll be able to look at it a little bit closer. But this just gives you an idea of the amounts of money that we're talking about. This is the budget for last we are actually currently operating under, and those are the dollar amounts by article. And then this next slide will even give you a better picture because this really shows you where the bulk of our money is going. And you can see the 2 giants in the room are the Health and Human Services, Article 2, and Education, Article 3. And that really is the bulk of money. So whenever they start talking about cutting money, if you're looking at a sizable cut, then the only 2 articles where you have a huge amount of money are Health and Human Services and Education. And education did not fare well last session. DFPS, we were lucky. We had some cuts, but it wasn't as bad as we initially thought it was going to be. So these are some resources for you. I put the website for the Texas Senate and the Texas House because that's where you go to find out the members that make up the Senate Finance Committee and the House Appropriations Committee. They're listed there on these websites under committees. If your state senator or your state representative is on finance and appropriations respectively, you have a much better chance of getting to see them or one of their key staff persons. And so we would urge you to please come participate in our Child Protection Capital Day because you have a much better chance of trying to meet with them and having an impact. I've also put the Texas Legislature online. That's where you can track the progress of SB1 and HB1 as it moves through the process. And then the Legislative Budget Board. They have a lot of great resources. There's a presentations that they put on there, everything that they do gets loaded up there. The actual budget where you can go and pull it down and see it is on their website. So if you really want to delve into looking for information about the budget, that's the best place to start. So when we start talking about this biennium, what are we looking at in terms of budget? Last legislative session, we started out with a revenue estimate from our Comptroller of $72 billion. And everyone was just shocked at the amount of cuts that were going to happen to get there. Now, luckily, even though they did make all those cuts and things were very tight, the estimate that she gave wasn't correct. She was way short. And so we have an $8.8 billion surplus, money left over in the coffers, that we're able to add for this next budget cycle. So her revenue estimate, the Comptroller's revenue estimate for this next budgeting cycle is at $101.4 billion. So that's very good because we hopefully won't have to have any of the significant cuts that we saw last session. Now, also, there is $11.8 billion in the rainy day fund. And you may remember that last session there was a lot of talk about not spending any of the rainy day fund. This session, that talk is different. You are hearing people talking about spending money in the rainy day fund for one-time purposes, obviously, for certain projects. And one of the reasons why they're talking about spending the rainy day fund, not only do we need it in terms of some of the demands on our state, but there is a limit on how much the rainy day fund can take in, and we are quickly approaching that limit, and so we need to spend some of that money. When you look at the revenue of the $101.4 billion, you're looking at that plus all the other money that we draw down from sources like the federal government. You're looking at a total state budget of around $208 billion. Texas, our budget, we are in line with many countries. We have a huge budget in the state of Texas. So while we have money and we're in a much better place than we were last time, we need to think about those things that our state is facing. Last legislative session, school funding was cut by $5.4 billion. And a large number of school districts filed a lawsuit against the state. That case is pending here in Travis County, and the district court judge just ruled in favor of the schools. So basically he's saying that it's creating an unconstitutional statewide property tax the way we're funding our schools and their disparities. So that is something that is going to have to be dealt with. The lieutenant governor has come out on record saying we need to put in, and that lawsuit is not over. That appeal goes directly to the Supreme Court. There's still steps that will go. We don't know how that's going to turn out, but the lieutenant governor is saying that we need to put about $2 billion away to address the lawsuit. Another big driver is the Texas Department of Transportation has a huge amount of debt, and that is something that's going to need to be taken care of. We've had an economic boom driven by oil and gas, but that is destroying our roads in South Texas. And so that is another big chunk of change that is being looked at. And then the other thing that you will hear many of the folks in leadership positions talking about is our state water plan. We have had a state water plan that was developed several legislative sessions ago that has never been funded. And so that is something, and we actually heard leadership and others talking about spending part of the rainy day fund for water. And you'll hear a lot of, I know Speaker Strauss talking about, Texas, we're doing good, our economy's doing good, but we have to really look at those things that supports the folks that live here and supports businesses coming here. So we have to look at our infrastructure, we have to look at roads, we have to look at water, and we have to look at our workforce and how that workforce is going to be educated. So really talking about the school system. Now, talked about the rainy day fund and how that $11.8 billion is getting towards the cap. So we'll probably see some expenditures from there. The other thing is that we have a constitutional spending limit or spending cap in the state of Texas. We also have a requirement in the state of Texas, unlike the federal government, to have a balanced budget. So there is a lot of talk about whether the rainy day fund is subject to our constitutional spending cap. Some people say it is, some people say it isn't. I know a lot of lawyers that specialize in this area are probably making their arguments for if it's going to be subject to. The reason it makes a difference is because it will make a difference on the type of votes that have to occur to spend that money. And if we have to vote to bust the constitutional spending cap in order to spend the rainy day fund, that may be a tougher vote for people to take than an outright vote to spend some of the rainy day fund. So the other big thing that will be happening, and it's happening very quickly, is I talked about an emergency appropriations bill. Medicaid, we didn't fund about $5 billion worth of Medicaid last legislative session, so that has to be addressed early on. There are also several other smaller things that don't come to the $5 billion range that have to be contained in an emergency appropriation bill. Now, if you look at the Senate bill, SB 1, that total budget is about $189 billion is what they've got, what they're looking at right now. The House budget is a little bit more than that. Yes, a little bit. It's like $1 billion more than the Senate version, which is usually the other way around. And so those is really kind of where we're at. Now, if you look at VFPS in particular, and you look at SB 1, which is what we've been working on, there is actually a 3.4 increase in SB 1 for the PS over what they were budgeted last session. Unfortunately, the FTEs, the full-time employees, the number of employees is exactly the same. So that increase doesn't come in the terms of giving them more staff. But then if you look at the exceptional items, and the exceptional items is the list that the agencies get to make of the things that they want over and above that base budget. And they prioritize those and they say, look, this is what we really need to continue doing our job. One of the real interesting things is when our new DFPS commissioner came in, Commissioner John Specia, Judge Specia, when he came in, he revised the LAR that had already been submitted by the department. And my understanding is that when he took the position, there was discussion about being able to ask for what he really felt the agency needed. And he has done that. He has come in and he has asked for a 19.9% increase in general revenue for DFPS. The total ask of GR, additional to what he already has, is $264 million. And he's also asking, we're very happy to see, for a 13% increase in money for employees. And he's really looking at the frontline workers and getting more frontline workers in and supervisors. So we were very excited to see that, and we are supportive in many of the measures that they are asking for. As we go through the agenda that has been adopted by the council, we will look at some of those items. And so let us now turn to the agenda. So the Child Protection Roundtable was created and is facilitated by TexProtects. And we started it in 2008. And really what our goal is to get all folks that have as some part of their mission child protection on board with a common agenda and a common message so that we're stronger. Because when we are all talking about the same things, it resonates much more with the folks up here at the Capitol. And so the Texas Council Child Welfare Boards is one of our partners, one of the members on the roundtable, and they have participated in developing this agenda. And this is just the budget stuff. We also have bill ideas that we're going to do in our next series. But they have endorsed this agenda. And so I want to go through, and I've broken it down with looking at prevention funding and then looking at funding for CPS. And so our first one here is to restore funding to the Prevention and Early Intervention Division of DFPS. Last legislative session, that division was cut it's a little over 30%, with a bulk of that funding cutting child abuse prevention programs. And so we want to make sure that that money is restored, that they are restoring, and that the child abuse prevention funding that was cut is a priority, and that those programs that are child abuse prevention, that those programs really target the area where we get our most bang for our buck, which is 0 to 5, and that we really are systematic about how we are delivering programs to the targeted population. We want them to look and do needs analysis. We want them to get input from stakeholders. And so those are the conditions of our arguing for restoration. And the department has asked for increased money for the PEI division. It is exceptional item number 6 on their list, and unfortunately, that is their last exceptional item. So in terms of their priorities, it's listed as last. Another part of the PEI puzzle is during the interim, the Legislative Budget Board did a study looking at some of the programs that are currently under PEI and some of the programs, and looking at the newly created Texas Juvenile Justice Department. The Texas Juvenile Justice Department charge of doing prevention. And so the LBB looked at that and said some of the money that is currently funding programs in PEI, we are recommending to the tune of $26.6 million that be transferred out of PEI over to the new Texas Juvenile Justice Department. There are a lot of folks, and this recommendation is coming out of the Prevention Committee. It has not been voted on by the full roundtable yet. We do anticipate that it will be adopted. But there are a lot of folks that are opposed to that because they don't feel that the services that are currently being offered by STAR, CYD, and the other at-risk prevention programs, that those types of services will be the same types of services that the Juvenile Justice Department offers. And so we are asking that those funds be retained within PEI. Not only that, that funding takes up a significant amount of the funds that are currently within PEI. Our next priority is around the nurse-family partnership. And many of you are probably familiar with the nurse-family partnership. It is a program that pairs a nurse with a first-time low-income mom that is in her 28th week of pregnancy or before. And we have, for several legislative sessions, been able to create the program, get funding, and maintain funding. And because we had a robust funding of that program, we were able, Texas was able to draw down federal funds from the Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visitation Program. They were able to draw down millions of dollars because of this investment we had made. And so now we have even more home visitation programs being funded in Texas that are coming from the federal level. So we really need to make sure that we maintain the current funding for Nurse-Family Partnership because they're serving over 2,000 families. We need to make sure those 2,000 families, and as they grow, keep within the program because it serves them up to child age 2. So we want to maintain funds for the Nurse-Family Partnership Program, and we really want to make sure that we are able to continue to draw down that money for the federal funds. Now, this next priority, and this again is a recommendation by the Prevention Committee. It has not been voted by the full roundtable. We anticipate it will be adopted. The other ones, if I don't mention that, that means that the full roundtable has already voted on them. This priority is around creating a continuum of home visitation programs. The Nurse-Family Partnership is limited in those it serves. It has to be a first-time mom. She has to be in her 28th week of pregnancy or before. They won't serve others. That leaves big gaps in terms of folks that are further along and families in need. And so what we really would like to see, building upon those federal funds that we have gotten, is to really have kind of a continuum of home visitation programs. And we have quite a few home visitation programs in the state of Texas that are getting federal funds or that are getting local funds. We have parents as teachers, home instruction for parents of preschool youth. We have Early Head Start has a home-based component. We have Avance, Healthy Families, Triple P. So there's a lot of programs out there, and these programs are evidence-based. They've had a randomized control trial or right under that. And so we want to make sure that we can invest and start that continuum and really have a true child abuse prevention program in Texas. And so we're really excited. We've had a lot of really great feedback going around, and this is a TexProtects initiative. We're working on it with Pew, Center for the States, and we're really excited about it, and we're very hopeful. And our next priority is really looking at trying to support an early childhood comprehensive system, and we're really looking at focusing on the prenatal to age 5. And this is building on work that the Health and Human Service Commission and the Texas Early Learning Council have done to really try to get on areas of need and the services of need and being able to refer to different programs. And so we're very supportive of the initiatives that they are working on to try to get that comprehensive system in place and to allow schools to figure out exactly what their communities need, very community-based approach. We actually have a couple of revenue generation ideas that came to the committee. The first one is to try to get either heirloom birth certificates or donations from marriage license and birth certificates to have a checkoff box so that we can start generating additional funds in the Child Abuse Prevention Trust Fund. So now we're looking at our CPS funding priorities. And so our first one is to restore cuts that happened last legislative session to direct delivery staff. Now, what wound up happening is, even though that's where the FTE cuts, the department actually realigned a lot of positions, and they were able to keep cuts from direct delivery staff. But what wound up happening is they cut technical support and case aides. And anyone who's been around caseworkers, they know that they depend upon these folks. And it makes their workload much more doable if they have that support staff. So we want a restoration of those folks. The other thing that was cut was CPS Purchase Client Services. One of the things in CPS Purchase Client Services is substance abuse prevention, substance abuse services. We want to make sure that's restored. Foster daycare was cut. This program, the Enhanced In-Home Support Program, that was a program that was within FBSS, Family-Based Safety Services, and that had been showing some promise, and it was cut. And then another big thing is services for adoptions, for post-adoptions. The providers were asked to come up with 25% match. So in essence, it was a cut because now they are having to pay a component of the services. And we have heard from folks that render those services that they cannot make that type of match. So we're those are the restorations we're looking at with regards to maintaining funding and make sure we fund caseload growth. So caseload growth is just the growth that occurs because of population growth. Very critical, because what happens if you don't fund caseload growth, when the department runs out of money for a certain item, they just don't do it anymore. So foster and protective daycare, relative caregiver support, and purchase client services, which are parenting classes, PAL classes, preparation for adult living, substance abuse, all those services, they need to fund caseload growth for those so we don't run out of money for those. Because, a caseworker has to have tools to be able to work with a family. And if they don't have those purchase client services and protective daycare, then they don't have the tools they need to work with a family to try to reunify the family. So one of the things that we always really are supportive of is our caseworkers, because our caseworkers are key to good outcomes for our kids that are in the system. And so we really look at how can we increase retention and how can we make sure we're getting good caseworkers. And obviously that starts with you've got to recruit good people. 30% of our CPS caseworkers have less than 1 year of tenure. They've been there less than 1 year. That's a huge number. And turnover in that group is 37.8%. You cannot run a business with that kind of turnover. So we really need to recruit the right people, and then we need to retain them. So one of the things that we are very supportive of is increased salary for our frontline caseworkers that are in investigations, conservatorship, family-based safety service. We also are very supportive of establishing a performance-based compensation system that really is fair on how it rewards people. Bonuses shouldn't be based on tenure. They should be based upon if that unit is functioning well and doing well and doesn't have kids coming back into the system. So the next priority, and this was brought to us by the National Association of Social Workers, and they actually have already had a bill filed in conjunction with this idea, and that bill is HB 969 by Representative Duke. This would, Child Protective Services, frontline caseworkers, and investigation, family-based safety service, and conservatorship, they would qualify after they had been there 1 year for a repayment of a student loan of up to $5,000. And it would also for the first level of supervisor. And then the maximum benefit that they could receive would be $20,000. The next idea, really looking around how do we make CPS caseworkers' jobs more doable. And that first one is what we talked about with the case aids and administrative techs that had been cut, restoring them, making sure that there's faster reimbursement of travel expenses for them, making sure that they have increased access to community resources. And those are the things that we wanted to make sure that they had access to. And then our next funding is the increase of statewide intake. Well, my slides are jumping around. Hold on one second. So the next one is increasing statewide into reduced hold times. Our current rate is between 8 and 9 minutes, and we want to make sure that we increase statewide intake capacity so that we can reduce that and reduce the abandonment rate. And then finally, our investment of $1 million to help sustain transition centers. These are centers that are providing services to youth that are aging out of care. And so we look at that in light of the exceptional items that the department has asked for, and a lot of the things that we were recommending, they have, in fact, included in their exceptional items. And so what we have done is we have supported certain exceptional items. So just, and I've listed these here, we don't have to go into these in detail, but they are asking for more direct delivery staff. They are asking for caseload growth for the relative caregiver program. And that's the program, and it's really like, let's say a grandmother agrees to take in the kids that her daughter had. That program provides a one-time payment of $1,000 and then a reimbursable of expenses of $500 for up to 3 years. And that's so she can, buy a bed, help with clothing, and get those startup costs. So they are asking for the caseload growth for that program. They are asking for caseload growth for foster and protective daycare. We are strongly in support of that. That was one of our items. Growth for CPS purchase client service. And very importantly, they're asking to that 25% match that I was telling you last session, they told everyone they had to assume themselves. They are asking for a return so that those providers aren't having to pay that 25% state match. With regards to pay increases, they are asking for some pay increases for certain targeted professions, degrees. Social work is one of them. And they're asking for a salary increase for supervisors so that you eliminate the step. If you give a raise to the frontline worker, obviously you have to increase up, and so that would increase the salary for the supervisors. They've asked for money to strengthen leadership skills. There is one of those mentions a mentorship program. In TexProtects, we've done a lot of research. Actually, Ryan Hutzel with our office did a lot of research around mentorship programs, and a strong, robust mentorship program has really been shown to reduce turnover. And so we're hoping that they are able to implement that. On-call pay, which obviously helps with workload and really the work environment, which is the #1 reason why people leave in Texas, caseworkers. They've also asked for more conservatorship workers, which we strongly support for. And another request is they had to increase the number of people that a supervisor has under them. Because of the cuts last session, they are wanting the money to reverse that, and we are supportive on that. But one of the provisos that we have is that if you're going to reduce the number of people in a unit, you need to talk to the supervisor first. You need to look how that unit is functioning overall. That unit may be doing really, really well. And if it is, and the supervisor doesn't want to have their one of their employees taken away, then they should leave it alone. The other two, and these two exceptional items have not yet been voted upon by the roundtable. They are items that are new in regards to they weren't contained in the old request. So these will be going, it's so important, I wanted to bring them up. The one was to reduce caseloads for kinship caseworkers, so they're asking for more employees because those caseloads are starting to get really high. And then the other thing is they're asking to actually increase in the relative caregiver program the amount of money paid out on that. You know, I told you it was a $1,000 payment, one-time $1,000 payment with 500 reimbursable expenses. That $1,000 is all you get regardless of the number of kids you take in. So if a grandma is taking in 3 kids, she only gets $1,000. What the department is asking for is that a person get $1,000 for each kid. And so I anticipate that the roundtable will adopt this measure. Placing children with kin has good outcomes. It's usually better for the child. And we have really seen relative placements step up in Texas. Since 2010, we've already had an 18% increase in relative placements, which is really good. And so that is all of my presentation for today. I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, who hopefully has been writing down the questions that we received. I can't look at the questions and do the presentations at the same time. And then for all of you who aren't members of TexProtects, here is Amanda's contact number. Her email. Please email her. We'd love to have you become a member. We really appreciate our partner, the Texas Council of Child Welfare Boards. They have been a great partner with us. This is the second in our series, our webinar series that we are doing with them. Our next webinar is going to be on the legislative agenda. At that time, we'll also talk about some of the bills that we've identified this session that are hot topic bills. But our next webinar session is going to be February 28th, and that, again, will be from 12 to 1:30. And Shannon Ireland with the Texas Council of Child Welfare Boards will be sending out information on that as we get closer, but please put it on your calendar. And then the other big thing I'd love for you to put on your calendar is our Child Protection Day. Texas Council of Child Welfare Boards is asked us to partner with them again, and we also have many other organizations that are partnering with us on that day. So April 5th is our Child Protection Advocacy Day, where we will be going around and making legislative visits. We're going to have a legislative briefing. We're going to have an advocacy briefing. We're going to have a big rally on the Capitol South Steps like we did last legislative session. We had great turnout. And it was because of folks like you that made that possible. And so please put that on your calendar, and we really hope you can join us that day. So now I'm going to turn it over to Amanda. Did we have any questions?
Okay. It looks as though Shannon had a question asking if there were any stats yet on the online reporting. And does that 8 to 9 hold rate take that into consideration?
It does not. The 8 to 9 minute hold time is nearly, that's not even the Spanish queue. That's the English queue. For some reason, they keep those separate, and that is just call-in time. I have never seen any information on abandonment with regards to online reporting, and that's actually an excellent question, Shannon. And I will ask the department about that because I don't know if they're able to attract abandonment that way. But that's a really excellent question.
And
go ahead. I'm making myself a to-do.
Okay. And I think Sophie already answered this on the chat, but maybe just for everyone else, if you could Shannon was also wanting to know if there's a list of home-based programs that are pulling down that the McV funding.
Yes, actually, it's a very good question. Dr. April Wilson with TexProtects is getting ready to release, hopefully next week, a huge report on home visiting, and that is going to contain everything you want to know about home visiting in Texas, basically. And it will show the programs that are currently operating in Texas, who's receiving state funds, who's receiving federal funds, who's receiving local funds, the number. She goes into talking about the different types and the models of the programs, the evidence, what studies show on the various programs. So hopefully that will be coming up soon. And I would ask folks to check on our website. We will probably do, all those that are signed up for our informational alerts, we will do an informational alert blast when that comes out with the linkage for the report.
Okay, and also wondering if they're considering the vacation policies. Have they ever considered sabbaticals for direct care workers? Tech positions have low turnover due to generous sabbaticals. Has this ever been considered?
Not to my knowledge. That is a very interesting idea. I will ask the department that one as well. I have never heard that topic brought up. I know that people leave and frequently come back, but I don't know if they're allowed to just take sabbaticals. I will find that out as well.
Okay. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat now.
And I did really good, y'all. I was trying to get this done in an hour, and we are just barely over that. Well, if no one else has any questions related today, we will put on the website of both the Texas Council of Child Welfare Boards and TexProtects. And please, we hope to see you on Capitol Day, April 5th.